We are going to now continue our worship service in this annual meeting. Yes, they are one and the same because our annual meeting ought to be an act of worship, although it doesn't always feel that way, but that's okay. So, we are going to begin. For those of you that need to go, we totally understand. But those of you that are on screen, we are also inviting you to stay and join us. We are so glad that you're all here. The annual meeting, of course, is a time where we come together to discuss and make decisions about the future of our church. And we've done this every year for 100 years, almost. So without further ado, you have to understand that part of the labors of the community, and I'll just say this one last thing, it has been a labor of the community. And you're going to hear about that, and I hope you get excited about what you hear. Without further ado, I want to invite our church chair, and who has been a great friend of mine, and one who has walked with me through this whole time and walked with us. Let's welcome David Brokaw.
Well, welcome everybody. We're just moving right into this. I actually think I have a milestone to meet within a certain amount of time, right, Steve? We're moving this along? Okay. Okay, well, welcome. Thank you for being here. I have just been very struck by the fact that there's so many people coming together for the good, and it just brings me to 1 Corinthians 12, and I want to read that real quickly, verse 4. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but all of them and in every one, it is the same God at work. Now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. And I think that that is so represented in what we're going to see today. There's so many people involved for the good of all. I would like to start just, Lena Mervold is going to open us in prayer by Zoom to kind of move along with our hybrid theme here. So, Lena, you're on. Can't hear you yet. We're working on it. You know what, just because of technology, but I'll open us in prayer. Father, we thank you for this community and for your gifts to us through each person in this community. You have blessed us. We are grateful. And we do give this time to you. In Jesus' name, amen. So I am going to ask Mike Still, I hope he's here, Oh, he's online too. Oh, this should be interesting. You guys read lips? We could save him, right? Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so I would like to recognize some people who have served and are finishing their terms. So actually, Mike Still is one of those. So just like to recognize him. He's come in. He went into retirement, and actually 3 people have been retired and were working with us, so they didn't seem real retired because we worked them pretty hard. but Mike Still has gone from being a CFO to our treasurer this past year and made many, many contributions to how we deal with our money and use that in support of our ministries. David Thaxton is not here, he's out of town, but he's contributed much in the last 4 years that he's worked with us. And Rich Doyle is here, so Rich, come on up if you would. He has served in many capacities for us, always there. He is a rock star and a rock. But anyway, so this is a thank you. He was our treasurer. He's been our vice chair this past year of the trustees. He runs the reading group. His wife and his kids are all involved in music and in drama, so we are grateful. And this is a small thank you. It's a thank you plaque and a cool cross that looks very artisan and artistic, so thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I'll put that up. Thank you.
And then we have some people who have been leading ministries for us, and these are all going to be very familiar people to you. So I'm going to ask all of you to come forward. So that's Vianne Duncan, who has been leading ministry for peace and justice for us the past year. And Teresa Parsekian, who has been our personnel director this past year. And Steve Stuckey, who has been coordinating property teams, and you should see what they do. Steve, are you here? And Judy Whip has been in charge of our spiritual care. Judy? And Lee Ferguson has been so involved in cross-cultural ministry, and he's now with God, with Jesus, but his fingerprints are all over it, all over everything, so I also want to recognize him. So anyway, these have been your ministry leaders, and we have a thank you plaque and artistic cross thing for you too, so hang on. Thank you. And in terms of incoming people, I'm not sure who's here and who's on Zoom, but Summer Wilson will be coming on the trustee board. I don't know if you're here, Summer. There she is. Thank you, Summer. And Bruce Ware will be our treasurer for next year. Are you here, Bruce? Okay. There they are up on the screen there. So we are very grateful to have them serving as trustees this coming year. And then our new ministry leads, Rebecca O, is going to be leading our Peace and Justice Committee. Are you here, Rebecca? And we have Jim Dorman is leading our cross-cultural ministry team. Wayne Aoki will be leading our personnel committee. Thank you, Wayne. Richard Parsekian will be our properties team coordinator. And Nancy Allen will be picking up now with our spiritual care. So we are very grateful to all of those people. And Susan's going to come up here now to help me recognize the different ministry teams and committees. We thought it would be symbolic. There's so many of these. We thought it'd be fun to just kind of go back and forth on this. So, and Susan is one of our trustees, and she's been nominated to be the next chair. So you'll be voting on her shortly.
Thank you.
So, do you want to start?
I kind of feel like we're at the Oscars, so we're kind of doing this whole thing here. But we do want to recognize all the work that our lay people have put in for all of these different committees. And whether it's social justice or taking care of our properties, and it's amazing how many people have volunteered the time to do that. So the first group that we do want to recognize is the Peace and Justice team. I don't know if there's a slide for this.
I think it's just the name. But
Okay.
if you would stand up, if you're here on the team, and we'll save our clapping towards the end, or for the end.
So
So there's Peace and Justice. Great.
And if you're at home as well.
If you're at home, stand up.
Stand
And
up.
Cross-cultural ministry team, would you stand up? Why don't you guys stay standing up?
Yes.
And we'll see how
Yes.
many people are involved in this.
We have our health and safety committee that's been in charge of all our COVID, if you've been a part of that.
And our sanctuary renovation team, which you'll be hearing more about today.
Our children's ministry, so if you volunteered in any capacity of being a part of our children's ministry.
And our student ministry, if you've been involved in that.
Our youth.
Yes.
If you've been a trustee this year.
And if you've been on the finance committee, would you stand up, please? There's Susie.
And our personnel committee.
And the properties committee. You know, that's a small committee, but they raise a lot of trouble. They just, they into everything.
We also have our gardening group that comes and takes care of our grounds and.
Here we are. Wonderful. And our worship and tech committee. Oh, they're busy working.
And our connections team that have been a part of welcoming. Obviously, we haven't been here as much, but.
And then finally, this is our 14th committee we're mentioning, our children's pastor search team, who were working very hard the whole past year. If you would stand up. Thank you. Could we just clap for everybody, please? Look at all those people. So I'm going to now turn this over to Kitty and Melissa to talk with us about the centennial coming up.
Hi, yeah. I can take this off? All right. Hi. It's good to see you guys. My first time back. Yay! I'm Melissa Hoyer. I've been at Pasadena Covenant about 6 years now with my family who's at home. And I'm going to talk to you today about our centennial and the planning that we're doing for that. So let's see if they have our slides. So we're celebrating our centennial in the fall of 2022. And to get ready for it, Pastor Steve has convened a steering committee that consists of Kristen Annis. I don't know if she's here. No, I don't see her. Rob Johnston, Kitty Perguson, who's not here today, and myself and Pastor Steve. And we've been meeting since April. So we were looking back at the last milestones, our 50th and 75th. Do we have slides? There they are. And these were marked by things like a booklet or a slideshow recounting the history of the church, and also a party. But to mark 100 years, that feels pretty big. And we wanted to do something a little bit different. So one big reason is that we don't just want to recall our history and be done and say, great, look what God has done. We want to look forward, and as Steve was saying, spur our church on toward the next however many years, the next 100 years it will be. So we want to look at the past, we want to celebrate what God has done, but we also want to look toward the future and where God is leading us. So to do this, we thought, well, what does God have in store for us going forward? Let's look at what our roots are, and that might tell us where God has us going. So we need to look at who we are and what is important to us. Families, arts and worship, neighborhood outreach and service, cross-cultural ministries. There are so many things that have been in the history of our church that we believe God wants to continue working through our church for. And so we thought it would be good if we could spread out the reflection and the remembering over the course of a year. And so what we have planned is for each month during the next year, starting in October, we would like to reflect and celebrate all that God has done. And so here's just like a tentative list of what that might look like starting in October. We want to celebrate all of these roots and characteristics of our church and remember everything God has done. But to do this, we need volunteer help. We can't do all of this celebration and reflecting, just the four of us. So we do need, this will all depend on your help and your availability. So as we're telling this story, the history of our church, we also wanted to do it in a bit of a more modern way, not just the same history lesson once a month on Sunday at the pulpit. We want to have blog posts of visual displays, photo booths. You can go to the next slide. All sorts of ideas, skits, children's illustrated stories. There are so many ways that we can tell the story of Pasadena Covenant and capture all that God has done. Let me see. Again, it will require volunteer help. Okay, sorry, I'm sort of bumbling through this. So as we are looking towards doing all of these things, we want to present you with sort of our vision. If you give a drum roll. Pasadena Covenant Church, beyond 100, for God's glory and our neighbor's good. We came up, Teresa Crooks, the Crooks used to attend here, helped us design this logo for the centennial. Our team loved it, the vibrancy of it, the color, how it represents going out and beyond what God has done. We're not just contained to the past and what God has finished doing, but there's more for us going forward. And we would love for all of you to be a part of that, celebrating that and preparing also for what's to come. So, I've mentioned volunteer work. We have Kitty Ferguson, who's the co-chair of the committee with me, leading our storytelling team. So she'll be in charge of all of this whole year of stories leading up to our big celebration in the fall of 2022. Joanne Doyle has, graciously agreed to help us transform our physical environment and display all of this history in a visual way, and we're grateful for her leadership there. And then I will be helping to lead the party, the big party that will happen in the fall. So we would love you to join any of these subcommittees. We welcome any help. You don't need to be skilled. I am not very skilled, but I know what's fun, so I can throw a party. That's all that needs to happen. So yeah, whether or not all these visions become reality really depends on you guys. We need your help. So on the last slide, you can just see some of the things we would love your help with. If you can't give your time to a committee, maybe you can tell us a story or a memory you have that relates to one of our themes, or you can share old photos or get us in contact with people we might have lost contact with, because we do hope to bring people back and have reunions and a big celebration in the fall. So we look forward to celebrating our centennial with you and looking forward toward what God has for us in the future. I have an email. I don't know. Will it be on the website? I don't know how they should contact me. Church directory, email, find me. Maybe I'll be here more. Sorry. Thank you.
did Melissa mention that they're looking for volunteers? I didn't know if maybe she forgot to say that. So we're going to try again to get Mike Still on the screen. So Mike, if you're there, hiding somewhere in Cyberland, I'm going to give it a try. There he is. There he is. He's the man. This is the quietest I've ever heard him. Okay. Mike, while you're waiting, this is the lovely, beautifully broken mosaic cross that I'm going to drop by your house for you. So, right there, saying thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I am on, and I don't know if there's a PowerPoint or not, but let me pull up a document. Just so I can share documents? That said, I wonder? Okay, can everyone see that? More or less? Okay, so the good news is, you may recall, just looking here, I'm just going to kind of scroll down to the bottom line here. If you look at this column here, the middle column here, you'll see that this year we actually forecast that our budget was, last year rather, was at a $96,000 deficit. And we're actually going to end up this year with a surplus, probably of at least $35,000. That's kind of in line with what I mentioned to you when we met a few months ago. And so that's great news. And that's really attributed to primarily to three things. One is, just on the revenue side, is we've got such a generous church. So thank you, thank you, thank you. A generous God and a generous church, and where so many churches are finding they've had significant shortfalls during the days of COVID this last year. Our revenue is actually up about $45,000, $50,000 over what we budgeted. So we budgeted $575,000 for congregational giving, and we're finishing at about $624,000. So almost $50,000 over budget for what we'd anticipated. So it's probably about a 7% increase, as well as over last year. Last year we finished at $587,000, so we're finishing about $40,000 over last year as well. So that's great news. So thank you for all your generosity. That's really stunning what we've been able to do. So that was one of the big factors that has led to instead of a $98,000 deficit, to actually a surplus of about $35,000. Second is underspending on our expenses. Our expenses were way down because we weren't on campus, and so you'll see that our operating expenses were down about $65,000. We budgeted $655. We're going to come in around $588, and our property expenses were down as well, from $289 budgeted to about $225. So again, a significant underspending on our properties. And then our personnel costs were down, primarily because we had the open children's pastor position. We had that budgeted for 6 months, and we didn't get anyone hired by the end of the year, and so we had personnel expenses that were under as well. So that's great news. So we've got a strong place going into this coming year. And so when we look at the budget for next year, in many ways it looks similar to this year's budget, and I'll just highlight the changes. On the congregational giving, we're kicking the congregational giving budget up to $620,000, which is a little bit less than this year, and a fair amount over from where we were a year, from fiscal year 20. But we think it's doable. It's a stretch, perhaps, but given what we're seeing this year, we think it's certainly in line. This has been vetted. The Finance Committee has met on this for a couple of times, as well as the trustees. You'll see here on the revenue also the Paycheck Protection Program we have in here again this year, next again in fiscal year 22, because we didn't actually get it booked this year. We've got everything submitted. The bank has approved it. We're waiting for approval from the Small Business Administration on that PPP grant, converting our loan to a grant. And so until they approve it, we're not going to book it as revenue. And there's not. So we also notice down here, we've got a placeholder here, $40,000 for the neighborhood pandemic recovery support, which we also had in this year's budget, or last year's budget, the fiscal year 21 budget, that we didn't spend. And so we're moving that forward into next year as well. So that's one of the big changes on the revenue side is the congregational giving going up. On the expense side, let me just go down to here. Let me go back on the congregational giving. This is a chart that shows our congregational giving over the last 15 years. And you'll see that for last year, this is as high, except for this kind of anomaly in fiscal year 14, this is the highest level of congregational giving we've had really since, because this is actually going to come up right here around 500 and a little bit more than 620 now. So it's the largest amount of congregational giving we've had probably since at least fiscal year 08, so in 13 years. So it's really quite remarkable. You see this trajectory of the growth that we're seeing. And so we're anticipating we're going to be able to continue at that level for next year. The big changes on the expenses for next year is Dan Hong, you may recall, was at 30 hours, and then we increased him when in March of last year. We increased him to 40 hours as we went online for online services because of all the additional support that we needed. And so Dan actually has volunteered and to reduce his time back to 30 hours. And so he's going from 40 hours a week that has been back to 30. And then we don't have a children's pastor hired. And so we do have an interim children's pastor in there for 6 months at 10 hours a week. And so Nancy Allen has agreed to take that role on. And then so we will then have the children's pastor in there starting in January again for 6 months. So we're hoping we'll have a new children's pastor on board by January. Until then, Nancy has agreed to step in. And then we have cost of living increases for our staff. That was something that was very important. And actually, we have gone through and increased actually the cost of living increase from 2% to 4%. And just because that's what we're experiencing here in Los Angeles. The latest numbers on the cost of living for the last year, 12 months, has been at 4%. It was 2% for calendar last year, but as I think as many of you know, when you face your own budgets, is inflation locally has really taken off since March. So March and April, May, the rate of inflation has really gone up, and so it's going at a much faster pace now. And so for the last 12 months ending May, it was actually at 4% and trending up. So we want to make sure that our staff are well taken care of and they know how much we appreciate them. So it's been a slight change. It doesn't impact the overall budget. We were able to solve it within the personnel budget because of some open positions that we have. But and then we're making some salary adjustments to bring a couple of staff up close to the market rates. As I mentioned, the children's pastor is in there for 6 months, beginning January. And then another important marker we look at is the properties budget, is to keep our personnel costs at 60% of our budget. And so we're within that for next year at 58% on our operations budget and 41% of our properties budget. So we're well within the targets that we set for ourselves and what generally is kind of the standard for covenant churches. Just a bit about other expenses. The peace and justice budget, you may recall, they had $10,000 in last year's budget for neighborhood pandemic recovery support. And there's about $4,200 of that didn't get spent. So they're rolling that forward into this year, mainly to help with some of the mono food distributions. And then the original support for the Can Do Kids is increasing from $10,000 to $20,000. one of the things in the property's income that we're doing is the Can Do Kids rent has gone up about $10,000. It's actually gone $12,000, I believe. And so that's to bring it more up in line with what market rates would be for all the space that they're using. And so recognizing that that's a big chunk for them, the Peace and Justice Committee has agreed to help cover $10,000 of that $12,000 increase. And then the cross-cultural mission, we have our missionaries increasing our cost of living adjustment, and again, that's increased to 4% to 2%. And then the Connections budget has $5,000 in there for centennial preparations. And then the administrative budget has a $5,000 in there for online giving fees, and that's really just a change. It's not an increase really in cost, it's a change in how we book our revenue. So in the past, we booked our revenue at net of those fees, and this year for fiscal year 22, we're booking it at gross. And so that's a change. Property expenses this year, the rental expenses are being reduced because from last year, because we had $8,000 in there to get our property ready for COVID restrictions, and then also the rental expenses are coming down because of some one-time cost on our outside on our apartments for foundation asbestos removal, which doesn't continue. So that's the budget that we want to approve. And as I said, it's got a deficit in there, but the important thing to remember is, well, it's got a deficit of $57,000 here between properties, and this is this column, third to the last column here, the $57,493 deficit. You'll notice over these 3 years, the first 3 years shown here, and this would be fiscal years 18, 19, and 20, we've actually have surpluses exceeding $200,000. And then on top of the $35,000 that we had last year. So we've got about $250,000 of surpluses over the last 4 years that we can, and those funds are sitting in a reserve. And so those are some funds that we can draw on while we grow into being able to, to support, fully support the budget without a deficit. So that's what the congregational, what the finance committee and the trustees are recommending after their review. But before I get there, I just want to mention too that on top of our congregational giving, we have designated giving that's also totaling $46,000, which is another almost 7%, 7% of additional giving for our Easter, Thanksgiving offering, for benevolence, food distribution, etc. And so, again, we've just got such a generous church, a very giving church. And so we're just so fortunate and grateful. So thank you. So that's the budget that we want to approve. As summarized there, it does have a deficit. And I think the key thing is it is showing an increase in congregational giving. And those changes that we talked about, the cost of living increase for our staff, 6 months for a children's pastor. Dan is reducing his hours back from 40 hours to 30 hours. So those are really the key factors driving that. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Great. So that's you're going to have a chance, of course, later on to vote for the budget. I'm just here to give you an update on and then keep the ball rolling as we're winding down here. Again, as a church, we have not only grown in our fiscal numbers, also grown in our numbers as a church, and so it's been so exciting. We've already talked about the new members in our church, but I just wanted to recognize them again, just because when we recognize them, last time you only saw the upper half of their body. And so if you are here, I'm going to say your name, and I'd love for you to just stand and be recognized. First, we have Liz Leahy. Could you please stand? Liz is over there. This is wonderful. Welcome. So exciting to have you. We also have David and Marla Smith over here. And right in front of them, Hak Jung Kang and Carolyn Yu. And then last but not least, Evelyn and Carl Baker. We are so glad to have you all be a part of our community. Thank you for joining us, and you guys get to vote and be a part of all of this. It's super exciting. Just to also give you a heads up, we're in the fall, we're going to get ready to do a big, fall kickoff. As you heard, we are going to we need to re-energize our muscles again and warm up our volunteering muscles, because this is the labor of the community. And so if any of these things that have triggered you to think about, oh, I have some gifts towards this. We've talked about being a sound tech or an AV helper or being on the band. We've also talked about helping with the centennial. There are just so many different things that are out there, and we want to invite you to be a part of it. Also, the children's ministry, we're going to begin starting that in September. But we're gonna do some training, and we're planning to do some of that training in September, and to really do a big, rigorous launch in October for most of the programs. The children's ministry is going to start a little bit earlier because the kids are already back. So just be aware of that as you're coming in, thinking, how have I been a part of this church's life, and how would I like to continue to be a part of it in perhaps a different way? All right, so now without further ado, I want to continue. Last, of course, but not least, very exciting as we're thinking about all of these things is, we've been talking about earlier this year about sanctuary renovation. What's happened to that? And to give you more of an update about that, I want to welcome Pastor Emeritus Jim Tyberg.
I don't know how you're doing. My leg just fell asleep, so I hope you're... Let's look back for a while. Do we have a slide there? This is one of my favorite Joseph Stoddard paintings he did for us actually many years ago. And I guess the reason I like it is there's life there, and there's something, it kind of reminded me today when Steve was talking about why are we celebrating? It's because what God has done for us, and I think this painting kind of picks that up. Well, we didn't, that wasn't our beginning though, so let's look at that. That was our beginning. That was, you guys know the gathering place, the room next to the sanctuary? That was pretty much put together in 1924. And just note that it's a 2-story space. And maybe it'll be that way again sometime. Let's think about that. Okay. That's the 1974 sanctuary. It was built in 47, excuse me. That was built in that year. I'm not sure what year this photo is, but it had a bigger box, you might say, that contains the sanctuary than it does right now. And notice, what are those things way in the back there? That's some stained glass natural light that comes in. Actually, on the left, there's a window that people could sit in the gathering place and be overflow. Next. This is that same era. And there's this thing on the left called the stained glass window. And that's on you'll see it on Lake Avenue. This is the only photo I can, maybe Steve's found some other photos. It's about the only photo I can find of that when the glass was open into the sanctuary. Next. And this is, it's hard to see, but this was a vibrant place. People just crowded in there. It had theater seats both down below and up in the balcony as they are today. Okay. All right. These slides remind me that we have been custodians of a treasure left to us by our previous generations, sacrificial service to Christ and to his church. Over our lifetimes, we know that this place was an incubator for not only local ministries and our spiritual development, but the spreading of the gospel to countless places around the globe. We have modified, remodeled, and added to our properties. Now we, as a congregation, look forward to the next generations and want to also leave those coming generations with an inheritance that helps them to be an effective and engaging missional outpost and a place where young and old are growing spiritually on the corner of Lake and Santa Barbara. I'm a latecomer to the sanctuary renovation project, and I have some people that asked to stand up and remain standing. Pastor Dan has done a lion's share of what we're going to be talking about. He's done some amazing work, and others have helped him. As I was leaving staff, Pastor Dan was coming on, and even before all this stuff happened, you remember where it says, for such a time as this, Dan gives to our church for such a time as this, for all the technical stuff, countless ways we couldn't have advanced without him. Steve Stuckey. There he is, way in the back. Steve has poured hundreds of hours into the lobby project, broader design thoughts and models of renovation. I was recently invited to join and lead the sanctuary renovation team, and it composed of Steve Stuckey, Keith Lewis, have to stand, Keith. Seren here today? Seren's, all right. Keith brings inspection knowledge. Seren's an engineer. These guys are going to be kind of the guys on the ground. And then we're joined by Marianne Haverhill, who's traveling, and Kathy Barsotti. Thank you all. Steve is... So this original vision, I'm not sure if at another meeting this was talked about, but it's on the screen. At Pasadena Covenant Church, we connect with God, with one another, and with God's mission in our neighborhood and around the world. Although the church is not defined by buildings and properties, the sanctuary building is a physical nexus through which we pursue our mission as a church and live out our expression of the kingdom of God. Pastor Dan and others have broken this project into like 3 primary phases, and we are thinking of the project in sort of the words renew and restore. Phase 1A, let's call it, includes things we can do to improve the sanctuary's beauty and usefulness, but doesn't require engineering drawings or permitting. So let me read you the description for this phase. First of all, the sanctuary building here. Is that the next slide? Thank you. Since its founding, Pasadena Covenant has been a mission-focused community. Our forebears chose mission revival architecture as the style of the sanctuary building. Among the key concepts of this style is that the building serves as a place of protection or fortress where people can experience the light of Christ and be drawn toward God. As a mission center, the sanctuary is a gathering place for the church and the broader community to experience the presence of the grace of God. Then it talks about how we're a mustard seed here. Next, please. So the intent of phase 1 is to do something immediately we can do in the sanctuary. And you'll find these notes in your handout today. It says in phase 1A, of the project, we will focus on aesthetic improvements to the worship space. We will update our flooring, clean up our walls, and open up the east wall to natural light with a view of our stained glass. We will also move to a more flexible seating system, chairs, which we will allow for flexibility in how we use the space to fit both short and long-term needs. This change will enable us to provide appropriate seating areas for those with accessibility needs, which is a growing need in our community. Yeah, we've never had really spaces for wheelchairs to sit on a flat area, and just in general, some of us are getting older, so it may be useful. Phase 1A also includes a few areas of work necessary to support that refresh and some of the groundwork for Phase 1B. So in other words, as we'll be waiting for permits and engineering drawings that can finish out Phase 1B, which would be things like working on the platform, getting new lighting, getting new audio, and probably the balcony work. So we can start though, we can get Phase 1A going with painting, removing the pews, putting carpet tiles down, getting lovely chairs, several things like that, and hopefully beginning to open up the window. Steve Stuckey's got some marvelous ideas on how to do that. Let's see what the next slide is. So this is, I'm sorry, did we have that other slide of with the seats and, there you go, maybe I missed that. So that's kind of like what we envision maybe we can get to, certainly by the centennial celebration next fall. We can't guarantee, however, that some of these things like new audio, new lighting, those things will be done by then, but that's what we're shooting for. And that's contingent on how fast the city cooperates with us. So just pulling it together then, well, Phase 2, after all this stuff in the sanctuary, we want to address the other part of the building too. So that's going to be Phase 2 down the road. That will take a lot of engineering, but Steve is an excellent model maker, and go ask him to look at his stuff sometime. It's amazing. Okay, the church has chosen a general contractor called WIC. It stands for Women in Contracting. It's headed by Karen Schnorhaveren. Pastor Dan and the team have consulted several contractors, and we're happy to settle on WIC. One of WIC's primary assets for us is that they have worked well with churches, whereas the other contractors have declined interest due to the difficulty they've experienced in the delays and fits and starts commonly associated with dealing in a church organization. Bless their hearts. Karen and WIC anticipate being able to start Phase 1A, this first part, in September. And that will follow your approval of this project. Currently, Karen and our architect are working together to come up with best estimates for the entire scope of the work. Karen believes she can have these numbers in a couple weeks to us. Our trustees and finance teams will then put together information for the congregation to intelligently vote on this project at a congregational meeting to be held Sunday, August 15th. So we look forward to bringing that information to you. We're hesitating to give you a number right now because we don't have all the estimates in for Phase 1A and especially for Phase 1B. So I can tell you at this point, it's in the mid 300s, but it's going to be increasing with these extra aspects that we need to take care of. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. That's wonderful. And to give us a little bit more of the detail about some of the revenue sources that we are investigating to pursue this, I want to welcome Susie Edwards.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. This has been a great presentation so far of what we have visioned for our church. I'm here to speak about one item that'll probably come up, that is going to come up on the vote today, and that is financing the vision. And will you just take my direction on the clicks, or do I get a clicker? Or I can tell you when. I have some animation. Thank you. Which button in the middle? Oh, this one here? Should be directional. That, okay. So we are a blessed church in that we have numerous resources. This has been pretty well established even 15 years ago when I was last on the finance committee. We have a giving church, and is this clicking over to the next slide? Oh, here we go. Or if you can click it over, that's fine, yeah. So here's my church. So there's a couple of images here that talks about our vision for the church. One is that we have a deadline of 2022 to start and complete phase 1 and possibly get into phase 2. But our real goal is to have phase 1, both 1A and 1B, completed by the 100th anniversary. So with that deadline coming up on us, we've got a couple of resources that we're going to look to for funding the project. Of course, if you could click the next clicker for the capital campaign, which we're going to hear about in a minute, on the far left, is it clicking through? That could raise some money for us, and we're hoping that the church, I'm praying for the church's heart to be generous in this area, but at this stage of the game and with the deadlines of starting the project, we don't really know how much money we can raise. So I don't know if that question mark came up or not. The second two resources that we have next would be our investment reserves and our cash reserves. And if you could click on one more time. We are currently on the finance committee analyzing the usefulness to it. Now, we've already committed $100,000 to the project from reserves. That's already on the table. And so we know first we'll probably kind of start with that as part of the capital campaign financing goals. But we have more, but we need to be judicious in deciding, how much to use of it, how much to draw down on it, how much we need to keep on reserve to make sure that we don't get waylaid by some unforeseen emergency or event or need. Then the third thing, which is where the church is very rich, is on the real estate side. We have a wonderful real estate portfolio, and through the beauty of Google, I was able to take a snapshot of Lake Avenue kind of going down south, and right there you can see 4 of our properties. You've got the cement building, the corner house, our sanctuary face, and the Carlson Hall, or Barker Hall now. And behind that is even more, and that's a very rich resource that we have here in Los Angeles, in LA County. It's very significant, and no debt on it at all, ever. I don't think we've ever had debt on it. So thanks be to God that we have been able to acquire this over the years, in the way that we have. But are we utilizing this resource to its fullest extent and ministry goals? And that's going to take a little time to dig into. Real estate is one of those asset classes that take just a lot of time to assess and determine, how to best use it in the vision that we have. So we don't know how that will come out yet. So we wanted to sort of deepen the bench, as it were, on the finance committee of resources that can help support our goal for the future. And we turned, upon the recommendations of a few people, we have turned to National Covenant Properties for some advice here. And they are, I'll tell you more about them in a minute, but what they can do is they can provide some resources for us to assess our real estate, which is very helpful. But the other thing they can do is provide some interim financing to help meet deadlines, basically. So in that, I don't know if my next arrow comes through here. I don't have my long distance glasses on, but so they'll help back and forth with resources on the real estate part, but they can also provide some of that interim financing that we can use on a short-term basis for the construction costs. And then as we click over one more time, know for sure what the dollar amounts are coming in from our other resources are as the project goes on, we can in turn pay back those borrowings from the National Covenant properties. So that's the intent of adding them to the bench, as it were. They're not going to be our first resource, but we would like them set up to be there and available should we find ourselves in a pinch. So who is National Covenant Properties? For those who aren't familiar with them, they were established in 1970 and partners with the Evangelical Covenant Church to provide churches and any church affiliate resources to utilize their properties well and to aid in expanding ministries. So they serve in numerous fashions, but they help out church plants. They help out churches like ours who are in a older property that needs some stepping up and deferred maintenance things to be taken care of, or have a vision for the future, for future growth in their ministries. So that's their primary goal in providing financing. It's not a profit-based, building up shareholder and CEO salary-based entity. It's really a ministry-driven organization. I think every member of the organization of MCP is tied to the Covenant Church, and any of the revenues that they receive in outside of covering their own administrative costs, in turn is there and available to serve other churches. So that's the beauty of them, is that they are driven really by ministry and not by profit. I showed, Raleigh is our representative, and you might see him, he's actually in the photo of, so the one person you don't recognize in the finance committee photo in your package, that's Raleigh. He's our representative in this. And he and I spoke before this, and he looked at Dan's very excellent presentation of our vision, and he said amongst their staff, they thought that it was wonderful what we were trying to do, and they were more than happy to help out in whatever resources they can provide. That's the one thing they kind of really look hard at. They're not wanting to make money off the loan. They want to make sure that first the project is geared towards growing ministry in the church and not just for our own comfort and vanity. So that's the first thing they really look at. Then after speaking to them, they also shared with us that they want to be compassionate and supportive of the churches who pursue this. And one of the things they want to do is, one, making sure that there's financial prudence in this. So they, of course, look at our financials and they say everything is good here. But they also are supportive in times where churches are in need. So as an example, in 2020, when we had the pandemic and many churches' revenues went down, they said that they were able to deploy resources to the churches that needed it most, but most importantly, there was no loan default or missed payment from any of the churches who had a loan, because they started first with the prudence on how we manage it, and then help out when there's times of crisis or need. Lastly, they are an extra set of eyes over our church on this project, because they are sort of a real estate-based lender in their lending portion. they will, in the construction phase of the loan, which I'll talk about in a minute, they will take a look and make sure that things are going in a timely manner, and portion off the payments so it keeps things moving along. They also review how everything's getting approved and just making sure that they're just in a partner in making sure that the project kind of moves along smoothly and also is reasonable. So that is National Covenant Properties. Next slide. So what they have offered to us upon reviewing our project is a loan. It's called a construction loan, and it is the construction loan piece of it is a short-term financing option. And next click, we're pre-approved for $500,000. We are in no way in the position of even considering that amount today or at all. The construction costs that we're getting estimates on is around $300, and if we're committed to some of it from reserves, I don't think we'll use hardly any of it, if at all. The origination cost, next slide, click, is $37.50. They take 0.0575% of the original offer amount as their cost to start the loan. After that, next click, for any balance that's accrued on the loan facility, it's 3.875. It is fixed for 3 years. And then after that, it does go to an adjustable situation, but we're not seeing that part, we'll get to that part because we'll have paid it off hopefully by then. The monthly payments due is interest only. We're only paying interest on the amount that we use. So if we do take a draw, say if it was $20,000, we're only paying interest on $20,000. So that's the way that works. And then there are, the next slide is there are periodic draws taken. In other words, we don't take one lump sum at once and then start paying interest on it. We take draws on it as we get to each stage of the construction. That minimizes interest costs, but it also provides that oversight that each stage of the project is being met in its proper fashion. And then lastly, if we do not use it during phase one, which is our great hope on Finance Committee, that we can find that capital giving or other resources will be there for that. It is still available for us for other future phases. So, but I don't want to talk much about that because that's a little bit way far down the line. The last piece of it is that there is a term loan. So if, the way these loans work is if there is a balance left after the construction phase that cannot be paid off for some reason, I do not think that's going to be the issue here with this church. It can be converted to a longer term note. And generally those go 20 years, principal and interest due each month. The interest remains the same for the first 3 years at 3.875. But after that, then it goes to an adjustable rate, which is set by the board of directors of National Covenant Properties, so it doesn't follow in lockstep with any market interest rate environment. So if the Fed changes or any of the other, if the 10-year Treasury changes, they're not necessarily following those trends, but rather what the needs of the churches are and the investors of the loans are versus the churches. And it's really more, again, driven by what the needs of these churches are as opposed to a market-based interest rate decision. So, yeah, and so that's all I have to say about that. But again, we don't really anticipate using that long-term feature of the loan, but it is in the loan document, so it needs to be discussed in order for people to vote, with their eyes open. So the last thing is just a vote yes would be to allow the trustees to accept the offer and allow the renovation team the flexibility to continue to meet the phase one project deadlines and complete by the 100th anniversary is our goal, with the finance team while the finance team is reviewing all the other options that we intend to tap into as well. We don't have an obligation to use it, but there is that upfront $50 origination fee, and then if you wanted to know what the potential interest rate costs, I put down $10,000 to $12,000. I think Mike put down $15,000. It's just because we don't know what the amount that we'll use. I think he was using the example if the whole 500 was being used up. I'm pretty confident that we're not going to use that full amount. So, but if it were used, if the worst case scenario were to happen, my estimate is 10 to 12. Mike's estimates 15 might be added to the budget costs, but it could be none at all, which is our prayer and hope. So that's it.
Thanks so much, Susie. As you can see and you hear, there is so much and so many pieces to something like this, which is probably why it took 100 years to begin working on this one. So without further ado, just for a last boost, and then we're going to have a quick Q&A. It'd be very short, and then we're going to go into a vote. So Kathy, why don't you come on and tell us a little bit more about what is happening with us.
Okay, I would just like to try to connect these three pieces: Jim's wonderful presentation on the renovation committee and Susie's presentation on the loan. These are like threads in a tapestry, folks. So the renovation committee has been working for over a year, trying to get bids, trying to find out what would be the best way to pursue renovation and also deal with lots of deferred maintenance. When the numbers started getting bigger, then I have worked for at least 20 years with National Covenant Properties. I sat on the board of our conference with 60 churches who have used financing from National Covenant Properties. And as Susie said, they loan to plant churches or help churches renovate their buildings to do ministry, not to build big, huge palaces in the sky, okay? Now, Mary Ann Hill and I are working on another thread of that tapestry, and that is, how can we raise money towards this project from our community and from various rings of people that we are connected to? But I want to just go back to, you saw those pictures of 1922, 1924. In 1922, there were 19 domestic workers, women, who cooked and cleaned for people like the Wrigleys and the Gambles, okay? And there were 7 tradesmen, and they came together and formed this church. And in their bank account, they had $36.45 in 1922. Okay? In 1923, they purchased this corner lot for $9,000, which today would be about $135,000. Even still, that's not what you could get this lot for, okay? They raised money to be able to start building in 1924, okay? They raised money by members giving. They went door to door, knocking and asking people to give to the construction of a church here. Yeah, try that today, okay? And their pastor, who was a singer, traveled to the Midwest and to the Pacific Northwest to churches and gave concerts to raise money. Yeah, Steve. you can take your guitar and no. Okay, so we're not going to do it necessarily that way, but the women in the church raised a significant portion of the monies to build the church. Okay, they were called the Phoebe Society. And they raised their money by having fundraising contests. So I figured we needed our first fundraising contest of the campaign. So the first question is, what amount did the church raise in 1924 to build the first sanctuary? Anybody want to give a guess? The person who gets closest will get a wonderful sucker that has a cricket buried in it, okay? So anyone want to guess? 9,000, that's how much they paid to buy the land to build the church. 18,000? 25,000? 60,000. 12,000. Anybody else? Okay, they raised 30, well, wait a minute, I've got my numbers here. They raised $30,000. So who was the one that said 20? Did somebody say 20? 25. Okay, Susie, you can have a sucker. Now, since Mark Gustafson isn't here, I can ask this question. Who can tell me how much that 30,000 would be worth today? Okay. Another guess? No, you can't guess, Susie. You've already won one. And you do this for a living. What? 400,000. Anybody else? 3.7 million, 2.1 million, 400,000, 2 million, 2 point. Okay, Teresa Barsekian wins. It's 472,000 and some odd change. Okay. All right. Okay. So if this little group of people who founded this church could raise the equivalent of 472,000, and let's think about it, they were not psychologists and contractors and lawyers and engineers and on and on and on. They were mostly tradespeople and people who cleaned other people's homes and cooked in other people's homes, okay? So Marianne and I thought, well, my goodness, if we're gonna launch for the next 100 years, shouldn't we have that kind of vision like they did, that they would sacrificially give so that ministry could go on this corner, in this neighborhood, in this community, okay? So, our theme, you heard already. Why we are doing it is, you can read it. I'm a teacher and I hate reading PowerPoint slides. I think that's the worst way of teaching, so you can read it. But we want to tie in with our celebration of the centennial to launch us for the next 100 years. And these are the kinds of things, what rationale? We have done nothing in that sanctuary space, or very little, to renovate it for 50 years, was the last time there was some kind of renovation. How many of you have not touched your house, done nothing in your house for 50 years, or your apartment, or whatever? No, it just doesn't happen. And so we have lots of deferred maintenance. We also have obsolete things going on in our sanctuary. And so we want to renovate it. We want to make it a place that families will feel comfortable, that we have good sound, good air filtration, all those things. And this is the time to do it, okay? So you've already seen some pictures. Jim's picture was a better picture because it showed how we might do the window, what work needs to be done on the platform, just so that it's accessible to people and they don't kill themselves getting up on the top of it. Okay, next slide, please. So as Jim talked about, there's going to be renovation in phases. In the same way, we are going to do a capital campaign in phases. And the first phase was for Marianne and I to go to the trustees and say, we have some reserves. We're not expecting all the reserves to go to this, but can we earmark some of it so that when we go to other people, we can say, our church is behind this, okay? So that was our first phase. Our second phase is we're gonna have rings of conversation with members of the church, so you can feel comfortable and then also decide what it might be your participation in helping us raise the money for this, okay? And the whole church is gonna be invited. It doesn't matter how much or how little you can contribute, we all need to be participating, okay? Then we have done, thanks to my husband, he's gone through all the church directories for about the past, 40 years, and he has identified at least 100 people that have came to this church at some point. Maybe they were a student at Fuller, who knows, who went on to become covenant pastors or even leaders of our denomination. So some of you might not know that one of our pastors here went on to be the president of the covenant denomination, okay? We are going to reach out to all of them and say, help us celebrate and help us launch continued ministry in Pasadena, okay? And we're even gonna go to churches that we planted in the past and ministries that we gave them their first ability to do ministry, okay? And ask them if they will join in our celebration, maybe partner financially, maybe just come and share how the church's impact was felt in their ministry. But we're trying to gather all the people who've been touched by the ministry of Pasadena Covenant, okay? So, we're gonna have, we are hopeful that we will be able to raise significant funds so that the National Covenant Properties loan does not have to be a large interim loan, and that we can, pay things as we go. But we're gonna be starting as soon as the congregation votes on the project at this August meeting, then we'll be reaching out to people to talk about how we can raise the funds to do this kind of renovation. And I love what Jim said, restore and renew. We have a lot to restore in the building, but to renew for future ministry, renew for mission in Pasadena, okay? I think that's probably good enough for now.
All right, I think now is a time where, just for a little bit longer, we are opening up for any questions that you might have. This has been an extensive and detailed annual meeting. Hopefully most of the questions have been already answered. Are there any lingering questions that you might have? Joe, yeah. Right. So there has been, do you want to answer that, Kathy? Right, we're talking to contractors and architects to think about how we would create a sound and light and heat barrier between the lake and our congregation. That's right, absolutely. Yep, that is one of the questions that we are addressing. Yes, Jim. The question was, one of the things that walling up the stained glass was that it was a double, it provided a lot of insulation from the noise on Lake Avenue as with sirens or cars and increasing traffic, as well as the heat that comes in the morning because it is east facing. And so that is definitely something that we had approached and we are tackling right away. Jim, do you want to talk about that? Yeah. No. Great. So what Jim said was that the wall's going to remain. We're just replacing that wall with the glass. So there will be insulation in between the stained glass and our congregation with glass. Yes. Richard.
Seating, it is on a slant. We're not going to be able to level all of the floor. There are going to be places where the floor does need to be leveled for ADA compliance, for proper seating, for wheelchairs and walkers and things like that. So that is part of the engineer drawings that's sort of ongoing. The seats themselves are designed to sit properly on a slope. So they are manufactured for that very purpose. And so there will not be that sense that you're pitching forward or anything like that. They're actually, the legs of the chairs are manufactured to sit on that particular incline, which has been measured. And so they're built for that purpose. Yes. So the purpose of redesigning the stage, those of you who are familiar with the stage know that there are a lot of steps, right? And we also use stage blocks that we have all witnessed. Some of our women speakers have gotten heels stuck in. It is not a safe stage, and it is not a versatile stage. And so what we'll be moving to is a bi-level stage that allows a lot more continuous flat surface that has 2 primary platform levels with a couple of places where there are steps, but also accessibility ramps so that those with walkers or wheelchairs would be able to get onto the stage to share a testimony or to be involved in the service in a meaningful way without them having to be only on the floor, if that makes sense. So all of those things are being considered as a part of the engineering process. For phase 1. So that would be in what we would call phase 1B, because those parts of the construction do require city approval and permitting. And so that would be part of the second part of the phase that we would hope to have done, let's pray, be done before the centennial.
Let's take just a couple more if you need, yes. Right. At this point in time, currently the neighborhood pandemic recovery fund is used to assist organizations. So it's going to be based as a grant-based type of fund. Again, it's not complete converted because we're still waiting on the Small Business Administration to allow us to convert it, if that's the right lingo. So, we haven't touched it in its form just yet. All right, yeah, Wayne. Last, is that okay if we just have one last one? Okay, yeah.
What are some of the other purposes that the team envisions using the sanctuary space?
So a number of our, what are some of the other uses for the sanctuary space that we might be envisioning? There's quite a variety, whether it be having a space for local music students to have recitals, to have a suitable space for partners such as the gospel choir that has been using our space in the past. It could be used for small venue concerts if that's something we want to do. There actually is a pretty significant potential revenue stream for the church if the church has a suitable sanctuary for weddings. Most people want a middle aisle. For what it's a cultural thing, right? We all accept that there's no necessity for it, but most people want it. And we have an abundant space for things like weddings, this gym for receptions, or the gathering place, or the courtyard. So we have a wonderful space for it, but nobody wants to use it because we don't have a center aisle. So there are multiple reasons why we would want to go to something like that, because it allows us not only to have some flexibility in terms of the space usage, but also to invite events such as weddings, for it to be a little bit more flexible. John? Okay. And it's the same thing would be like, if we're doing memorial services, open caskets, certain things in terms of how we manage the seating and the flooring, there would be some benefit to upgrading the system so that we have the flexibility and turning radiuses that we would want for those kinds of events as well.
Hey, can I just say I'm really encouraged and impressed.
Yeah, we are all waiting for that carpet to be done, right?
12-inch by 12-inch piece of history. You can your pick. It could be the stained one with the time when your kid accidentally dropped the communion cup. It could be the one where the wax was. You can pick whichever carpet you want. $500. Who wants 500? 500 right there. Hey, 600. Anyway. All right.
Okay, I think it's time for the vote. David and Marla Smith and Joe are going to be collecting ballots, and Dan has some directions on the vote as well. So, Dan.
Those of you who are still thank you for sticking with us online. It's been a long time on your computers. If you're a voting member, you should have received an email with a link. Those of you who are in person, you're welcome to use that as well. Just don't vote twice, and use the in-person paper one and also that one as well. So choose which way you're going to do it. Go ahead and vote now, and we're going to tabulate them. If you are looking for a paper ballot and you need one, just raise your hand. We may have extras if some in our space are voting online. We're going to tabulate them as quickly as we can and give you the results of that shortly.
So we have 39 yeses and 1 no and 1 abstention. For our trustee recommended the budget of 2021 and 2022, we have 67 yeses and 0 no's and 0 abstentions. For our loan, the property reserve, so giving permission for the finance committee and trustees to make the decision to take the loan if needed. We have 65 yes, 2 no's, and 2 abstentions. And then for our capital gains giving authorization of $100,000 of our property reserve, we have 66 yeses and 2 abstentions, 0 no's. So everything has passed. So thank you for your time and effort.
Well, everyone, thank you for sticking in with it. This is so exciting. We are so glad that you are a part of this momentous occasion. Without further ado, we just, this is it, right, Dan? Yeah. Okay, let's all close in prayer. God, we are so grateful for your faithfulness over us and your promises that hold us together. Thank you for all the hard work that has been put in for this, for all of these different parts of the project, these threads. These are yours. May you, Lord, weave us into your great tapestry. We thank you, God. Bless the people that have put all this together. Give them strength and renewal. May this be an encouragement for them and be with our church and our community. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.